basic configuration of a Cisco switch. So this is the moment that you guys have all been waiting for. The previous videos that I've been doing, we've been looking at how devices over a network can communicate. Now we are actually going to be focusing on configuring features for these Cisco devices that we've been talking about. So obviously we know how devices communicate, but as a network engineer, our job is to actually configure the devices which facilitate and allow this communication to take place. Now, the next section of videos, we will be looking at layer 2. So we'll be focusing on switches and features which we can enable for switches based on what's laid out for us in that CCNA exam blueprint. So this video, just to set the scenario, imagine that you just brought a brand new Cisco switch, you've taken it out the box, it's still got that new switch smell. Now, what do you do from there? So obviously you know that you need to set up this switch for your network so that it can actually start to switch frames and actually have a function. This video, I'm going to cover the base configuration that I myself put on all my lab switches or on all of my corporate switches. So switches whilst I'm at work that I receive and I need to have some base configuration on them. So this is the minimum configuration that you would need just so that your Cisco switch has some configuration so that it can perform its job. So I'm going to pause the video now. Next time you see me, I will be on the console line of a Cisco switch. Welcome back, guys. So through the magic of video editing, I'm now back at my Cisco Switch command line interface. So just to tell you what I've done in the background, I've just opened up Terraterm, which is the terminal emulator program that I use. I've opened up, I've chosen a serial connection, I chose communication port or COM port 4, and I've connected to my Cisco switch. And obviously I'm connected via the console port, so I've got my console cable running from my laptop into my Cisco switch. Now for you guys who want to know, the Cisco switch I'm using is a Cisco 3650. I think that's what it's called. Let me double check. Yeah, no, sorry, 3560. This switch supports power over Ethernet, and to be fair, it's a brilliant switch. So the switch itself has got 8 ports on it, which makes it perfect to store in a desktop because it's very small. And to be fair, I use that switch all the way up to CCNP. So the features is supported, allow me to actually use that switch to study all the way up to CCNP. So it's a very, very good switch and has all the features that you are going to need to study and practice configuration for this CCNA exam. So when you initially start up a switch, and this is a fresh switch with no configuration on it from scratch, you're going to be presented with something called initial configuration dialog. And so basically what this is just like somebody who holds your hand and helps you through something. Essentially with this, the switch will hold your hand and essentially guide you through the base configuration. That this is configuration, the minimum configuration that you will need to get your switch up and running. However, we're network engineers, we're experts at this, so we're just going to put no, okay? So put no. Now the first mode you're brought to is going to be user mode. And if I use a question mark shows all the commands that you can enter. As you can see, in user mode, you're limited to what commands you can enter. Very, very few commands. Can't really do anything from user mode. If I was to enter the enable command, and let me show you some of these shortcuts. So if I enter ENA question mark and press tab, as you can see, it finishes off the command for me. So this is a quick shortcut. So when you're typing in commands, whether it's a HP switch, a Cisco switch, if you enter enough of that command and press the tab key, it is going to finish that command for you. Again, this is just a quick way of trying to type commands very, very quickly and being very quick on the command line. Press enter. I'm now in privilege mode. If I use the question mark again, as you can see, it's listing all the commands available to me in this mode. And as you can probably tell, there are a lot more commands than in user mode. And so privilege mode is going to be used for troubleshooting, show output. So with show output, this is going to show you information and configuration about the switch. So what you would normally do, once you've configured a feature, let's say access list on your switch, or let's say it's VLANs on your switch, you can then go and verify that configuration by using specific show commands. And so in this case, the show version will just show me the switch I'm using, the version of software on it, the software release, etc. The iOS image which is being loaded, etc. The system image file. It's going to show me that it's stored on flash. So like I said, is that every image's configuration is stored on flash memory on a Cisco device. It's going to show me information about my device as well. So how many virtual Ethernet interfaces I have, how many fast Ethernet interfaces I have, gigabit Ethernet interfaces I have, whether password recovery is enabled or not. It's going to show me the base Ethernet MAC address for my device, the model number, all sorts of good information that you can use to verify what kind of device you are working on. However, let's get straight down to the base configuration. So like I said before, this base configuration, this is the minimum configuration you will need to get your switch up and running. Because switches, they must have some configuration on it for them to actually be able to function as a switch. So to move into global configuration mode, I'm going to use the command configure terminal. And the first configuration change I'm going to make is going to be changing the host name of the switch. So if I type in host name, this gets SW1, as you can see down here, the host name is set to switch. And once I press enter, it's set to SW1. So host name is essentially just the name of your switch. It's used to identify what switch you are working on. And so usually you would give your switch some sort of descriptive host name. Let's say building a first floor office or something, or building 2 second floor office. So you'd give your switch some sort of descriptive name to be able to identify that switch easily. Okay, the next thing that we're going to configure now is going to be the enable password. So let me just go back. So as you saw, from user mode to privilege mode, moving from user mode to privilege mode, there's a lot more that you can do in privilege mode than what you can do in user mode. And from privilege mode, you can access the global configuration mode, which means that you can make changes on your Cisco switch. Now, obviously, that kind of poses a bit of a threat, because if somebody who shouldn't have access to our switch somehow gains unauthorized access and they're able to get into privilege mode, then there's no stopping what they can really do. They can look at all the configuration, they can get into global configuration mode and make changes and cause all sorts of havoc. So obviously it would make sense to have some sort of mechanism, some sort of security mechanism between that user mode and between that privilege mode. And we can do that via the enable password. So if I type in enable password, ask me to enter my password, I type in Cisco. Okay, if I now go back down into user mode, so I'm in user mode now. If I enter enable and press enter, now I'm prompted for a password. So this is just sits as a security mechanism, essentially having some sort of security mechanism to stop a unauthorized user from being able to move from user mode into enable mode, into privilege mode, without anything stopping them. The next thing we're going to have a look at configuring is going to be on the console port. So obviously I'm connected to the console port. I can access the switch without being prompted for any password or anything like that. So I'm going to go line console. So line console, and then numbering it with computing devices starts from 0. There's only one console port, which is going to be labeled 0. So line console 0. Now I'm going to set a password for the console port. Okay, and this is very important, is that when you set the password, you have to tell the switch that if anybody wants to connect to you via the console port, prompt them for a password. So this is the password that they have to enter. But at the moment, the console port, even if I was to go back and then try to connect back to the console port again, it's not going to prompt me for a password. The reason being is because you have to tell the device to prompt someone for a password. And we do that with the login command. So login, okay, enter. If I exit from this, exit, and press enter now, as you can see, I'm now prompted for a password. Okay, I have to enter the Cisco password, and now when I move from user mode to privilege mode, another password. So again, this is just adding some security mechanisms onto our device so we can have some basic protection. The next thing I'm going to configure is going to be on the Vty lines. So the Vty lines, they stand for virtual terminal lines. You need to move into global configuration mode, sorry. And like line mode is a sub-configuration mode of global configuration mode. So anything entered in line mode applies to that specific line. So the Vty lines, they're virtual terminal lines. They just describe how many concurrent remote connections via SSH or Telnet that I can have inbound to the Cisco switch. So in this case, the numbering is from 0 to 15. I can have 16 people, 16 different Telnet sessions, or 16 different SSH sessions, or a mixture of Telnet and SSH sessions on this switch at any one time. And just so that you know, is that until you do some sort of base configuration on your Vty lines, you cannot have, I repeat, you cannot have any remote connections into your Cisco device. No remote connections at all. So if I was to try to Telnet onto the switch, I'll just be presented with an error message saying that Telnet is allowed but no password set, so access is denied. So again, we are going to do the same thing that we did on the console lines, set up the password of Cisco, tell the device to prompt. So we're saying to the device, can you please prompt the user for a password when they try to connect remotely via telnet. So SSH by default is not enabled on a Cisco device. If I'm going to do display, actually let me show you something as well. So we can enter the command show running configuration, and this will show us all the configuration currently on our Cisco device, Cisco Switch. As you can see, password login, Cisco login, okay. And by default, Cisco devices will support telnet connections. SSH, there's some additional configuration that we need to do to enable the switch to support SSH connections. Now, what we are going to do is we are going to configure an IP address and default gateway for the switch. So obviously, being able to connect via the console ports is all good, but ideally, it would make more sense if we can access the switch remotely so that we can perform some configuration on it remotely. Imagine that your enterprise is very, very large and you've got branch sites all over the place. If for every time you had to configure a device at a branch site, you have to go on site, that's going to be a pain in the backside. By assigning an IP address to a switch, it allows you to remotely manage that switch without actually having to be physically on site. So to do that, we have to configure a layer 3 interface on a switch. So layer 2 switches, this isn't the same for layer 3, but layer 2 switches support one VLAN interface. A VLAN interface is just a layer 3 switch, essentially, a layer 3 port. A layer 3 port has to have an IP address, and each layer 3 port belongs to a separate broadcast domain. Whereas layer 2 ports, which is what all ports on a switch are, layer 2 ports belong to the same broadcast domain. So layer 2 ports don't allow us to configure any sort of IP address information on them. A VLAN interface, or what they like to call a switch virtual interface, is just a virtual interface on the switch which allows you to assign an IP address to it. Layer 2 switches support one SVI, and that is usually used as the management IP address. So it's what you would do in real life. You would assign a particular subnet, let's say 192.168.10.0/24. You would assign a particular subnet to be your management subnet, and then your Cisco devices, you would give them an IP address from within that subnet so that you can manage those devices. So in this case, I'm going to give the Cisco switch the IP address 192.168.10.10, subnet mask of 255.255.255.0. Press enter. Exit from here, and I'm going to assign the default gateway. And obviously, the default gateway has to be within the same network as the management network. I'm going to give it a default gateway of 192.168.10.1. So this will allow me, if I was in another subnet, another network, to be able to manage this device remotely without having to be physically on site. So we've done that. So we've configured the enable password, the default gateway, go back to line console, and we've got a bit more configuration to do on there. So I always like to do a login synchronous. So what this does is, when you're working on a Cisco device, it's going to be displaying log messages, especially when you're working on the console line. It just stops those log messages from interrupting the commands you are entering. That this doesn't really cause any issues, but it's just a real pain in the backside. Is that when you're typing in a command, that halfway through the command, some console output or some log message is going to interrupt that command. So that's opted for doing that. I always like to enter this command, exec -timeout 00. So all this tells the device is that if a user is connected to the console port and they're inactive, then don't kick them out. So by default, we obviously wouldn't want to do this. So the way that works, when you're inactive on the Vty lines or on the console port for a certain amount of time, it's gonna kick you out of that session. Exec timeout 00, that tells the device to never kick you out of this console session. Now, I would never enable this for corporate devices. So for devices which are actually in a live environment, I would only enable this for devices which I'm working on in my lab for practice, because it's just a pain in the backside. Exit from here. The next thing I'm going to configure is going to be a lot what we call login messages. So you can actually configure your Cisco switch or router to display a message when the user connects and signs in to that Cisco device. The way you do that is with the banner command. There are 3 type of log messages, and we'll look at all 3 of them: login, exec, and message of the day. So let's set up login first. It says here where C is a delimiting character. So essentially all you do is use any sort of symbol or number to denote the beginning of your message. Okay, so this is the login banner. Press enter, and it's still asking you for the message, and then you identify the end of the message with that same character. That is all the delimiting character is. So banner exec, if I type in motd, sorry, banner exec, sorry, and then hash, and then I type in this is the exec banner, and end with that again, and then banner motd, that again, this is the motd banner, end with that. Okay, let's exit from here. Let's look at the show running config, see what we've done so far. Okay, so we've configured, so let's have a look further down. So we configured an IP address for the device, its default gateway. We configured the exec banner, login banner, motd banner. We've also configured login for the console line, login for the Vty lines, etc. All that sort of good stuff. Fantastic. Now look, if I press enter now, I'm prompted for a password, and as you can see, the message of the day banner is displayed first and the login banner is displayed afterwards. So normally your login banner is going to say something like unauthorized access is prohibited. If you are found to have unauthorized access to the device, you will be charged, etc. So it's literally just like a legal warning for anybody who connects to the device, essentially just saying that unauthorized access is prohibited, and if you're caught, then you will be charged, etc. So I'm going to enter the password of Cisco, press enter, and the exec banner is displayed after you've actually signed into the device. Enable Cisco, all good. Show running config, again this shows the configuration file, the running config file. So it's important to note that there are 2 config files, startup config and running config. Startup config is the configuration file your Cisco switch will load when it's booting up. The running config is the configuration file present on the router, which lists all the configuration whilst our router has been up and running. If you want the Cisco switch to retain that configuration during a reload or a reboot, you have to copy the running config to the startup config. So the running config and startup config are different. The running config, if you don't copy the run to the startup config, then that means that over device reboots, your switch will not retain its configuration. So the way it works is that as your device is running and as you enter commands, it's going to save all that configuration to the running configuration, okay? Anytime that you want to then retain that configuration, you have to copy it to the startup configuration, and we'll have a look at that in a sec. But if I just do show running configuration, press enter, as you can see, and this is asking me host name, enable password, and this is another thing that I want to show you. As you can see, the name of password is in plain text, and also if I go further down, the password listed here is also in plain text as well. Now, if someone were to shoulder surf and actually have a look at the running configuration file, this defeats the whole purpose of having a password, because the passwords are stored in plain text. There's another command that we can use, which allows us to enter a password in clear text, but then stores it in a hash format. And so to do that, we go back to configure terminal. I do a enable secret, and now I type in Cisco. Okay, let me just do no enable password, enable secret Cisco, and if I do, so you can have it enable password, enable secret set up. The enable secret takes precedence over the enable password, but the reason why I decided to take away the enable password, because your enable password and secret have to be different. If I do a show running config, press enter now, and as you can see, where is it, that enable password, enable secret now, and we're thinking, wait a minute, that is not the password that I entered. So what the enable secret does, you enter the password in clear text, the Cisco switch is going to take that password in clear text, run it through the MD5 hashing algorithm, and spit out a hash, and the hash is what is stored in your configuration file. So it stores the hash of the password, not the actual password in plain text, which improves the security of the password. That means that if someone's behind you and they're looking over your shoulder, they're not going to be able to identify what that password is. Okay, so that's all done now. So we configured that. And let me show you something. So if I do show start configuration, I press enter, as you can see, start configuration not present. So if I were to reboot the device now, all the configuration we just entered would not have saved. So how do we save configuration so that we can retain it over device reboots? We use the command copy running configuration, startup configuration. Now if I do the show startup configuration, as you can see, all the configuration that I've just done is now saved. That means if I were to reboot this device, the configuration would be retained, okay? And now, to be fair, that's it. That's literally all the configuration you would need to set up your device. A very, very basic configuration, so that you can put some quick configuration on there and get your device up and running. Now let me show you some of these awesome show commands. So show commands you're going to be using quite often are going to be show running configuration, list out the complete configuration file of the device. I always do show running configuration because, like I said, unless you save running configuration to startup configuration, your running config and startup config are going to be different. Startup config is the configuration file the device uses when it loads up the configuration when the device reboots. Running configuration is the configuration currently present on the device. So that can be maybe configuration changes which have been made whilst the device has been up and running. So that lists all the configuration. The next command you can use are going to be show interfaces, and then you would type in the interface. So in this case, fast Ethernet 0/1. And as you can see, this will list information such as the kind of bandwidth, the MTU, etc. And also interface stats, so errors, input packets, output packets, multicast, collisions, late collisions. We'll go through all what these means in a later video. And another command you want to use is show IP interface brief. Okay, and if I enter this now, as you can see, it lists all the interfaces, layer 3 and layer 2. So layer 2 interfaces are interfaces in the same broadcast domain. So that means that these interfaces here, they are going to be in the same broadcast domain. That means that if I connect devices to these interfaces, those devices all have to have an IP address in the same subnet, and they will be able to communicate with each other directly without going through a layer 3 device. Layer 2 interfaces, we can't configure any IP addresses on them. And so this command will show you if an interface is a layer 3, the IP address assigned to the layer 3 interface. It will also show you the status of the interface, whether it's up or down. So in this case, all my physical interfaces, fast Ethernet 0/1 through 0/8 and gig 0/1, they're all down. There's nothing plugged into them. My layer 3 interface currently at the moment is going to be status up, but protocol is down. So this interface is down. So for a layer 3 interface to be up, a physical interface also has to be active. Has to be active within that VLAN. We'll get to VLANs later on. Some other commands you can use are going to be show version. Again, this will show you some basic information about your Cisco device. And to be fair, that's everything that you would know. So that's everything you're going to know for base configuration. And again, base configuration is the minimum configuration you need on your Cisco device to get the device up and running, and so that it can perform some basic functions. So that's going to be for your Cisco switch. So I could literally configure my device like this, connect it to my network, start plugging in devices, and those devices will be able to communicate, and I'll be able to get out to the internet. So that's all there is to it. We've gone over the base configuration. Now I would urge you guys that if you guys didn't practice with me whilst I was doing the base configuration, to practice it in your own time. Just get used to navigating through the Cisco command line interface, navigating between the different modes, user modes, privilege mode, configuration mode, all the sub configuration modes, using End or Control Z to move straight from your sub configuration mode back down to privilege mode. Get used to using the question mark to find the commands that you need to enter, all that sort of good stuff. If you found this content useful and would like to see more like it, then please subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you found this video useful, then please share so that we can get high quality IT training to the masses free of charge. Thank you very much.